You may have not even known that this exists at UConn, but in fact, the Water Pollution Control Facility is arguably one of the most important places here and contributes to UConn's title as one of the top greenest schools in the United States. For a bit of perspective, this plant is located in Northwest Campus, off of Discovery Drive as you're coming into UConn. The number of steps we've divided it into here is a bit arbitrary since it can be considered one big continuous process, but it does help to break it down into smaller, more understandable pieces. So we're going to go through each part one by one, basically as if we were a drop of water, from its journey into the plant all the way to getting cleaned and exiting the plant. The entire process starts in the Headworks building, which contains the step screen, the grit chamber, and the grit classifier. The purpose of the step screen is to trap larger inorganic waste such as hair, sanitary napkins, and other objects that may be in the water that's brought in. So here's a simple diagram showing what happens. So at the bottom, as you can see, the water is flowing from left to right, and as the water is going, the step screen physically steps up and it catches objects. After passing through the step screen, the water is slowed to a flow of 1 foot per second, and this low rate of flow is so that any additional finer bits of inorganic material, this could be gravel or sand that's in the water, can settle to the bottom. And there's usually air that's injected at the bottom so that this material can fall through and be wasted at the bottom. After waste has been taken out of the water through the step screen process and also the grit chamber, this waste is ground up in the grit classifier, and this is also washed to get rid of any organic matter that may still be trapped in it. This material is then compressed, and then after enough waste has been accumulated, it falls into a wheelbarrow. And the end point of this waste is a landfill after it's been tested to make sure there's no heavy metals or toxic materials in the mix. The next step here is a simple splitter box, which will direct the water into the correct aeration basin that's being used. The next step, shown in 3 and 4 on the map, is the longest period of time that the water will stay at one part, and usually it can stay up to a few weeks or 20 days. Based on this map, it might look like that it goes to the 4 area before 3, but in reality it flows through 4 quickly and spends more time in 3 before going back to 4. The aeration basin, or a carousel, is this part where water will go around and around many times in a cycle, and the purpose here is to decompose the ammonia in the water and turn that into nitrate. So how it does this is with actual bacteria that's in the waste, which is actually breaking down the pollutants and the ammonia in the water and converting this into nitrate. The bacteria in this area is aerobic, meaning it needs oxygen to survive. Because of this, there are aerators which inject oxygen into the water to keep the bacteria alive to do their jobs. This is done in a 3-step process where first the ammonia is converted into ammonium from the alkalinity of the water, and then the bacteria converts ammonium into nitrite with an I, and finally nitrite into nitrate with an A. It's alright if you don't understand these chemical equations completely, but the takeaway here is that the bacteria uses the oxygen in the water, which you can see as the O2 in the equations, and that allows these reactions to take place. There are actually 2 of these aeration basins, but there's only one being used at any given time. The reason for this is that the total load of water coming in only needs about 1 basin, and the basin that is being used alternates every few years. While it's empty, it's able to be cleaned and maintained. Looking at this empty basin, you can see just how huge it is and how much water it holds and processes. After the bacteria has converted ammonia in the water into nitrate, the next step is to remove any nitrogen. However, this can't be done with the same aerobic bacteria, but rather it needs anaerobic autotrophic bacteria. Aerobic meaning they don't need oxygen to survive, and autotrophic meaning that they use the carbon in the water to convert the nitrate into nitrogen gas. And this nitrogen gas is then released into the atmosphere. Now, these two areas where the entire denitrifying process happens is a continuous loop. So the water will continuously undergo these two processes to make sure the bacteria has affected all of it. You may be wondering at this point, well, why is nitrogen a bad thing that we spend so much time getting rid of here? And the answer is that if we didn't remove nitrogen in the water, where it eventually reaches a natural environment, it can cause a lot of damage. Eutrophication is something that happens when there's far too many nutrients in the water, and the nutrient being nitrogen in this case, and it causes a lot of algae growth, which can suffocate animals and naturally growing plants in the area. If drinking water has a high amount of nitrogen, this can affect human health, specifically causing something called methaglobinemia, which is also known as blue baby disease. Next, the water gets split using a splitter box. This is pretty much what it sounds like here. There's one input of water coming from the aeration basin, and that gets evenly split to go to the two clarifiers, which is the next step. The primary role of these clarifiers is to encourage the settling of sludge and other things that are incorporated into the water. So these circular clarifiers take advantage of different densities and physical properties of the various solids and liquids that were mixed together in the previous stage. The denser sludge in the water that contains organic matter and microbes will sink to the bottom, where it's pumped back into the aeration tanks or wasted out. The oil and lighter scum floats to the top, where the skimmers slowly push it out of the water. And that material then goes to the scum pump and it's recycled back into the system. Water exits the clarifier by flowing into a weir. The clarifier is where all the sludge gets removed, so microbes have been here for the whole journey up to this point. Remember that the aeration and anoxic basins required beneficial bacteria to denitrify. So when the water is done with that step, it will keep the sludge that still contains that same beneficial bacteria. RAS, or return activated sludge, is recycled back into the system from the clarifier to the aeration tank, and this prevents the loss of microorganisms so that they can maintain the bacterial population needed. The waste from the clarifier is important, but not all of it is needed. So WAS, or waste activated sludge, is wasted out, and this will contain excess microorganisms since only a certain amount is needed to maintain the system. The next step is the chlorine contact chambers. In the chlorine contact chambers, the wastewater is ready to be decontaminated through chlorination and then dechlorination. This tank has a snaking layout which allows water to move slowly through a smaller amount of space. Screens are used to straighten the water flow. Sodium hypochlorite is fed into the system using pumps, which is closely monitored to be about 0.3 milliliters per gallon. As the sodium hypochlorite hits the water, it ionizes into sodium and hypochlorite ions. The hypochlorite ion attaches to any microbes and bacteria and oxidizes it, and rips the cell walls apart, killing it. This step is important because human waste contains bacteria such as E. coli, and the treated water is going directly into the Willimantic River. Sodium bisulfite is then used to neutralize the residual chlorine after the designated chlorine contact time has been fulfilled, and this is about 41 minutes in the tank. This is an important step because chlorine is considered dangerous to the freshwater environment if the level of chlorine exceeds 0.5 milligrams per liter. Compared to other disinfectants sometimes used in wastewater plants, chlorine works fast, it's relatively cheap, and it's effective against many organisms that are unwanted in the water. Some of these bacteria and viruses that we are aiming to kill includes E. coli, Salmonella, and hepatitis A. After this, the effluent is now considered safe to discharge into the Willimantic River. At this point, we've gone through all the steps of the facility. One way we can split all this knowledge up is into 3 main steps which utilize different types of processes and knowledge. First, we have the biological process, which uses bacteria to break down the ammonia and remove nitrogen in the water. Next, we use physics to separate material of higher and lower densities. And then finally, we use chemicals to disinfect the water. Along with being released into the river, a portion of it is cleaned for further use. So the reclaimed water facility is located right beside it, a position that allows treated wastewater to flow into the facility to be further processed, cleaned, and sterilized via microfiltration and ultraviolet disinfection. This sterilized water is then used in the cogen plant, which generates all of our electricity, heat, cool air, and steam here on campus. It operates using 3 turbines, which is similar to a jet engine, but it produces power rather than thrust. These 3 facilities service both the main and depot campuses of UConn, as well as UConn's neighbors in the surrounding town of Mansfield. So this concludes the video tour of the Water Pollution Control Facility. One final note I have is that if you're interested in what you learned about, there's an opportunity to learn even more and teach others this process too. You may have heard of the Engineering Ambassadors Organization, which has a tour guides branch. So along with tours of the School of Engineering and the cogen plant, we also do tours of this water pollution control facility. This also isn't just for civil or environmental engineering students, and you don't even need any prior knowledge. In fact, there's a part of the wastewater process that applies to pretty much every engineering major. So if any of this interests you, feel free to send me an email at emilie.alber@uconn.edu. Thank you.